I'm excited about the beginning of this series, and here's the reason why. How many guys, just nod your head if you know what I mean when I say that guy. Just nod your head, yes? Okay, good. Here's the reason why it's important, okay? Because what we love, at our church, we love diving into Scripture. We love diving into what, big spiritual ideas like we talked about at Easter, working our way from what's the remedy of life to set us right with God. We love doing those big ideas. We also love talking about little things that you might not think is that important to God, but that it very clearly is. And this is something that we talked about as a staff. We wanted to do something about work. It doesn't matter, because when somebody says, what do you do? What do you say? What are they asking you, really? You can talk back in church. It's okay. When somebody says, what do you do? What are they asking? What's your job? What do you do, right? What do you work? What do you do for a living? That's the majority of the questions we get asked because we spend the majority of our life doing something. And so no matter whether it's I'm a homemaker, I'm a mom, I'm a president, I'm a CEO, I'm just a guy that holds the sign, when you got to go, don't go, go. You know what I'm trying to say? Doesn't matter what it is, there's value in work, and God has something to say about it. But when we think about our lives as Christians, and we talk about the idea of being Christians at work, there's an immediate sort of, maybe not fear, but immediate kind of hesitation of most people when we found out what it is. It's because nobody wants to be or even be perceived as that guy. You know what I'm saying? The Jesus juke. You guys know what I'm talking about when I say that? That's a football term, to juke, to just kind of go completely opposite the way you think you're going to go. It's that person at work. It's on Facebook or Twitter, and they're just you're talking about the last episode of Hell's Kitchen, and they're just like, I wonder if Jesus was on the show, if they'd rename it Heaven's Kitchen. Don't be that guy. You know what I'm trying to say? Don't be that. Don't wear your no pain, no gain t-shirt to work. Here's the reason why. Because God does have something to say about work. He does have something to say about our lives intersecting with what we do. And he does have something to say about how we do that, because how we do what we do matters. But I can promise you, I haven't met anybody that has reconsidered their life because somebody sarcastically threw out a Jesus juke or wanted to change the conversation and drop a spiritual little nugget in the bucket. I've just not met anybody that's responded to that in a positive way. So guess what? As a pastor, I implore you, don't be that guy. You know what I'm saying? Don't be that guy. We feel like there's something to say, that God says something about work. And here's the verse that we're going to use for the whole series. It's Colossians 3:23, okay? And that's, just in case you know, that's why our scout pack is called 323. We have a scout group here. I've just spent the last 30 hours with bugs and scouts and tents. And so I'm a little tired right now. But it was a fun weekend. But that's our scout pack here at our church. They chose this verse, Colossians 3:23, to be their verse. And it has a whole lot to do with what you do with your life. Whatever you do, and this is the reason I say that, what do you do? I'm a pastor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a whatever. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving, and you can replace the last word with working for. It's the Lord Christ you are doing for. It's the Lord Christ you are living for. So we think he has a lot to say about work. Just in this little verse that we're going to read every week, we see that he has a lot to say. Number one, he cares about what we do, which is kind of hard because depending on your job, even you might not care about what you do. You know what I'm saying? Depending on what you're doing, you might not care what you do. So what? I build widgets. I fix I don't care what I do. Why would he care? Well, he cares. Why? Because there's a reason you'd be doing it, and the reason is you're doing it for him. The next thing that he talks about in this verse is there's this idea that when you're working, you're not working for your boss. Now, I know that might surprise you because I got hired by Jim, and Jim signs my check, and I'm working for him. Not really. This is where Paul in Colossians says, you're working everything that you do with all your heart. You're doing it for him, as if you're working for him, as if you're working for the Lord. And the next thing that it asks there is, are you giving it all your heart? That's a big deal because we live in a certain culture now. It wasn't this way when my parents grew up, but there's a culture now where why would you give everything to the company when there's no loyalty from the company to you? Why would you serve with all your heart when really they're only paying you X number of dollars an hour and it's really not worth it? Well, again, if you're not working for Jim or Steve or the CEO or the board or your clients, you're working for God, then you're going to give it everything that you have. There's a whole lot in this verse It doesn't just say that God cares about what you do. He cares about how you do it. How you do what you do matters in this life, and it matters to God. And so that's what we want to spend a little bit of our time in this series focused on. How we do what we do. And we want to also focus on when our lives and our faith and work sort of intersect. Those times and moments where your faith and your values intersect with, the deal or the client or the vendors or the thing you're doing, 8, 9, 10 hours a day. When it meets, when it matches, and when it crosses, what happens? And today we're starting really with a foundational idea of your character. The character of you and the character of your actual work. So for us today, I don't even want to talk about the actual descriptions of character or the parts of your character, because even if you're not a Christian, even if you're just a moral person, when I say character what that means. Honest, integrity, ethical. You have other words, to describe, someone of character, of good character. But from a Christian perspective, from one that we look at the values of our faith and the value of what God has instilled in us, we come up with the same list of words with some heart intent. That he's called us to be honest and truthful. That we are called to have integrity, which means your word needs to be your word. Your yeses are yeses, and your no's means no. And I was in sales for so many years. I hate this southern, polite North Carolina yes. Can I just say this for salesmen, okay? When you call on them and you say, can I call you next week and talk to you about the thing? And you say yes, you're a liar. That's what you are. Because you don't want to hear about their product and you don't want to buy it. So there's this southern little polite thing I'd rather say yes than no. And I'm just be someone of integrity. Let your yeses be yeses and your no's be no. That's me going on a rant. All right. Diligent, hardworking, diligent, forthright. This is a big one. To be forthright, to be someone who tells the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. That you don't fall for that sin of omission. Where I'm telling you about a product, but I hide all the stuff that it doesn't do and can't do and won't do for you. Really just honestly coming down to the point that you're someone who's going to do the right thing in the moment that the right thing is called for. That's really where we come at it from our faith values in terms of characteristics. Now, what happens when they meet work, and what happens in our lives when they meet a work, an industry, a company, a boss, a CEO, a manager, a client, where you are all of a sudden asked to compromise your values, your faith, your character for the sake of the deal, for the sake of this bonus, for the sake of the team, for the sake of what the client really wants done. What happens when you and your work, no matter where it is, part-time, full-time, you're asked by whatever it may be, the industry you're in, the market you're in, to have to compromise your character, compromise your value, just a little lie, a little white lie, just a little bit of omission. Here's a few examples. To sign that thing that you know is not true. To show up and have to go to that bar and entertain those clients when you know you shouldn't be there. To not share everything about a deal. To be asked to make promises that you know your company can't deliver on. And to write reports and, again, put all the good stuff up in the front and kind of hide all the bad things. And sign off on those deals. What happens when we're tempted is that every company, regardless of their moral vision and their moral statements, what most of us realize in our culture is that no matter the industry, no matter the company, no matter the boss, most of us have to struggle with the fact that when push comes to shove, when it's tight, when it really matters, that income is going to be more important than ethics. Okay, the cash flow is going to be more important than your character. And that's where we begin to have those challenges and those struggles. And so what we do, and this is just a common thing, is we begin, this is for men maybe probably more than women, but we both do it. We categorize or compartmentalize our work and what needs to be done for work versus our home and our family and our friends and our life group and our church. That, Jesus is all about our character and truthfulness and honesty and all about the soul and all about these things in this area. But I have to build this wall because Matt, you don't understand the market. You don't understand the industry. I knew that when they hired me. You don't understand my company. You don't understand the clients I work for. Matt, you just don't get it. There's a whole different set of things they expect, and therefore I have to live my life on a different set of standards at work. And so we build walls and we compartmentalize our job to think that we can keep things separate. And the problem is that character is a foundational part of your life. It's a foundational part. And one thing that you think you're keeping separate from the rest of your life, I can promise you over time, it seeps everywhere. Because your character is your character. Let your yeses be yeses and your noes be no. And I'm telling you, for most of us, it's not that we all went to work for the devil. I know that. I mean, some of you might actually work for him. But, you might not. It's not usually that. Usually, it's just for a moment that you need to do that. It's just for a moment when the pinch comes that the compromise is needed. And it's not forever. It's just the one time. And that's where the challenges come for us in terms of challenging our character as it intersects our work. Let me just give you a few challenges that I know we all struggle with. One character challenge we have is oftentimes security. That when we are working and we are basically feeling the pressure for security for yourself, maybe it's your lifestyle, maybe it's your security for your spouse or your kids or whoever you're providing for. You're a single mom, you're a single dad, like you're it. You're the only income, and the security, the pressure you feel to provide security will challenge your character in those moments. Because if you don't close that deal, and if you don't go drinking with the guys and take up the challenge to drink them under the table because they're not going to respect you if you don't. If you don't do some of those things that challenge your character, then you're risking your security. Next one is your reputation. I mean, your reputation or even recognition. That's another one of those things that challenges our character because in the pinch, in those moments, you've spent a lifetime with clients. You've been creating your client base. You've been working towards this, and maybe you only told one lie at the beginning, but in order to keep your reputation up, in order to not lose that manager or that deal or not lose your job, you've got to keep the lie now going because the last thing you'd want to do is risk your reputation and let them know that maybe at the very beginning something wasn't right or we overpromised what we couldn't deliver. And the last part is really, what's the last part? Progress, sorry. And this is actually one of mine that's probably more tempting for me. You think it's just people who work normal jobs. It's pastors and staff too. The one that's tempting for me is progress, the idea that we need to have forward motion. That I'm really addicted to forward motion. That the idea of having to take 2 steps back, taking 2 steps backwards because of the, having to have a shift or get better perspective. I hate that. And the temptation will come at me in my character moments when I feel like there's a pinch to just be standing still or moving backwards when I would rather be moving forwards. That success and progress are the things that I begin to put the priority on, and God's values in my life begin to take a back seat. And we do that with all 3 of these things, security and reputation and character. Just say those with me after me. Security, reputation, and progress. Those for me are the ones where our society and our culture, they reinforce our dependency on these 3 things all the time, every single day. And in the moments when our faith and work collide, and our character gets challenged, we all immediately see the short term, or I would say the immediate loss. Because it's usually pretty clear. It's financial. It might be your job. It might be your reputation. It's usually financial because we see the immediate loss. Well, what if I don't do this, then that client's not going to sign. And if I don't do this, then that's not going to happen. And we immediately see the immediate loss in terms of compromising our character. But the problem is when we compromise our character, when we put God in the back seat and those things in the front seat, there is always a greater loss and more long-term loss that we're going to suffer through. Just a few of the long-term losses is moral authority. That if you continue to operate from 2 sets of standards and 2 books, you will struggle to maintain any moral authority you have in your life with your work, with your coworkers, with your family, with your friends, with your life group. The worst idea possible would be in the long term, you continue on this path to compromise, and all of a sudden you look at your little girl one day as a teenager, and you've lost the moral authority to look at her and say, honey, you just got to do the right thing. You've got to do the right thing. You've got to trust God in this. when she knows that daddy doesn't do that. That's a hard thing when a wife is looking at a husband and she has made decisions and compromised for the sake of the client, for the sake of the company, for the sake of what's expected, and looked at their spouse who they've neglected for years, and they've lost their moral authority to say, honey, you just got to trust God. You just got to trust God with it. Another long-term loss is self-respect. You can't do this for very long. You can't be that person who compromises your character over and over and over again, even though you think you've compartmentalized it. It will eventually weigh and toll. It will put a toll on your soul. Because here's the reason why. There's two reasons. One is you realize to a certain degree that deep down you're a liar and a coward. And the reason you're a liar and a hypocrite is because you consistently now are having to operate with a higher expectation of the people around you than what you even expect of yourself. You have a higher expectation for you're playing by a set of rules that you don't want your lawyer playing by, or your accountant, or your friends, or your clients. But you don't have that expectation anymore on yourself because you continued to put those other things in the front seat and put your character and your values and your faith in the back seat. And the reason that you're a coward is because you've gone into a place where you're just living your life and making decisions out of fear. Fear of what's going to happen if I don't. What then? Then what? And those two things are pretty powerful, but that's not, in my opinion, from a Christian perspective, that's not the most significant loss long-term that you get. The most significant long-term loss, I feel like, is you lose the opportunity to see God show up. You've lost opportunities to see God show up in tangible ways in your life, at your work, and in that situation that you didn't feel like there was any way out. See, one of the things about the Bible and our literature and the books of the Bible that we have and what we go to, if you were raised in church, you got the felt board out and you saw the things, that the cool stories, and Gideon. And our Bible is filled with stories, not of perfect people who fail all the time, but we see tons of stories of them standing for their character, standing for their faith, letting their faith values take the priority in their life in moments, and then seeing God show up. And it's the same God that we serve today. And we have the same opportunities for us to stand our ground and have character and live a life of character and not be that guy, not rubbing it in people's faces or making it a joke or kind of this cheesy, syrupy thing, but to really live with some conviction and live with some integrity and live it out in those moments that when the pinch comes, you won't back down. You won't bend and you won't break. And you might see the opportunity show up where God shows up in a tangible, unmistakable way. That's probably the biggest loss of all. When we consistently allow those times of friction, allow those times of tension to come, and we put our character on the back seat. We pursue security. And our recognition or our reputation or the progress of the deal or the progress of our job, we begin to serve it instead. I want to just look at one story today. Just one of those Old Testament stories that we know. If you were raised in church, you've heard this before. You want to rush to the end of the story all the time, and I'm going to try to help you not rush. But and if you don't know, if this is your first day at church and you don't know what we're talking about, you will not believe what we believe when you read this story. Okay, it's a crazy story. It's in Daniel chapter 3. If you want to look along in your Bible or on your phone. In Daniel chapter 3, let me just give you a little bit of setup in the context. It's about 605 BC, okay? And the Israelites, the Jewish nation, has already been conquered. So the heyday of the Jewish nation, King David, Solomon, that's all over with. They've already been conquered by Babylon. And the Babylonian Empire was a massive empire, and it was really the King Nebuchadnezzar who was running it at this time. He is known in history as an incredible leader. And one of the reasons Nebuchadnezzar is an incredible leader is because what he would do when he would conquer a nation is he would go through, of course they'd kill everybody and people would scatter and that was just normal. But what he would do is he would go in and he would find the top musicians and artists and mathematicians and architects and sculptors and he would find those royal families of educated kids and educated families, and he would take them as slaves back to Babylon. And then what he would do is he would put them into training. He would give them new names. He would give them, training in their culture, in their language, and he would raise them up as Babylonians. And then all of a sudden, as they get older, they're now serving the Babylonian Empire. And sure, they have their own cultures and own roots and gods that they worship and traditions that they have. But he had a cosmopolitan culture, a diverse culture. And he got the best of the best of the best, serving to keep Babylon in that culture. Now some of the guys you know from the story, Daniel, obviously, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are three more guys that we know of. And these three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, same thing, came as slaves. They were a part of that whole crew in Daniel 1 where they were like, we don't want to eat the king's meat, we want to eat healthy. And they were like stronger and better and had better tests at the end of the day than the other ones did. And they rose very quickly in their authority and in their given authority by the king and in their progress. If you would, they sort of climbed the corporate ladder. And by the time we see them now, they are the city managers of Babylon. Like they are the city managers. They are people of high prominence. They have, slaves of their own, servants of their own. They have huge houses. They're wealthy. I mean, these are not slaves anymore. These are people in the kingdom. They're officials. And they have the ear of the king. That's a big deal. They are people, if you would call them, they are people that we would look at as CEOs or high-level managers. They are people who had influence and a lot to lose in their life. Well, something happens in Daniel 3. We're going to unfold the stories we read together, but this is a moment where their faith and work intersect and tension begins, and they have to make some choices, and we're going to just kind of discover that together. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue, 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. He was a thin man. And he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. When he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officers, everyone of importance, to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Keep going. Then a herald shouted, this is where someone's going to give something important information. People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. Oh, there's a new rule getting ready to happen. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, the drums, the electric guitar, the keyboard stand, that's what he meant by the other instruments, the harmonica, bow to the ground and worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race and nation or language, they bowed to the ground and they worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Here's what happened. This is a moment in time when King Nebuchadnezzar decides, I've got all these people and they've got their own traditions and their own cultures and their own gods. But what he believed as a king is that when we went in and conquered you, our gods conquered your God. Like we won. And every once in a while, the king is going to, if you read Daniel, you notice, every once in a while, the king decides in those moments that he needs to show everyone who's the boss. He needs to have a moment in time where he looks at the nation that he's building and say, I know you've got your own religion, I know you've got your own authority, but here's what's happening. When the band warms up, you're going to acknowledge that I'm the one in control. That I'm the one that deserves to be worshipped. And that I'm the one who controls the fate and future and the outcome of your life. Just want to acknowledge who the boss is. When the band warms up, I'm going to do this tomorrow in the office. When the band warms up, who's the boss, right? That's the moment that we're seeing here in history. In verse 8 it says this, but some of the astrologers then went to the king and informed on the Jews. Now what happens here is that obviously, these Jewish men, these original slaves, have risen to a place of power. And like anything else, we just know this, not everybody in the kingdom is going to be excited about that. So there's these astrologers, these other officials that sort of are looking for ways to get them into trouble or to kind of pits the king against them. And they found something, and they go to the king, and they inform on the Jews. So they repeat in the next few verses, they sort of repeat the king's decree. You remember that time you said the law, and then you told them what the consequence was? And then it says this in 12. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you've put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty, respect. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue that you've set up. Keep going. Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that these guys be brought before him. And when they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the golden statue that I've set up? I will give you one more chance." And this is where you notice they are people of value. I mean, he doesn't really want to lose them. Nebuchadnezzar likes these guys. "I'm going to give you another chance, just in case that list of instruments was too long. Look, I'm going to give you another chance for you guys to bow down and worship the statue I've made when you hear the band warming up. When you hear the sound of the musical instruments, here's one more opportunity, guys, because I don't really believe this is true. I want you to kind of help me through this." But then it says this, "But if you refuse, you will," what's the word? Be. If you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Now here's what happens. Don't leave that slide. When he says the word be, he is now speaking as if he does have ultimate authority and control of their life. You'll be gone. You'll be ruined. You'll be dead. Like, I have the power. I'm the one who controls the outcome of your life. If you don't do this, you will be thrown into the fiery furnace. And then the statement comes after that, which is the statement that you and I struggle with every time our character is challenged. He says this, "And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power." And it's the same thing we struggle with. Anytime that we're faced with these questions, we struggle with that word "then." You need to do this. You need to do this or it's over. And then who's going to hire you? And then who's going to pay your mortgage? And then who's going to take care of that car payment and that lifestyle you like so much? And then who's going to close that deal? And then what's your boss going to say? You and I struggle with the exact same thing. When someone steps in to claim authority and to claim control, whether it's a client or a boss or a CEO or a company or an industry, and always those fear statements come, but if I don't, then what will happen? Then what? Same thing for these guys. You're going to be thrown into the furnace. And then, what God can save you from my power? It's a big, big statement. It's a question at the root of it that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to acknowledge and answer before they could give their answer. And the question is this: who controls the outcome of your life? You have to settle that, because in those moments when we are tempted by security and our reputation and progress, when we are tempted in those moments, we are, and we put God in the back seat, we are basically saying that those things control the outcome of our lives. That our pursuit for security and the fear of what will happen if we don't have it is now controlling us. And God's in the back seat. You have to acknowledge this and answer this question. Who controls the outcome of your life? Well, these guys had an answer to that question. And it fueled their response to the king. Let's see. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you." That's not a mean thing to say. That was just basically them saying, we don't have any excuse. There's no need to give us a second chance. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is, what's the word? Able. One more time. Is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. And again, notice the respect by which they're responding to their superior. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've set up. We're not going to do it. Listen, the answer to this question when they said, who controls the outcome of our life? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, God does. It wasn't because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were so smart or so cunning or so had a great strategy that they were saved when Jerusalem was sacked? It wasn't because of anything that they did outside of following God that got them to raised in ranks at their job, raised in ranks in the kingdom. And they're just sitting there responding to the king saying, King, we serve you. We serve Babylon. But we know who controls the outcome of our life. And so no, we won't serve or worship the statue that you set up. We won't do it. We know what he's able to do. I mean, we've heard what you think you're able to do, and you might do it. But we also know what our God is able to do, and we don't even know what he's going to do. Like, we don't know. Either way, King, and I don't think they said this, but either way, you lose. You're going to lose us. Like, either we don't do it, and we're saved, and then you still lose, or we're dead, and you still lose, right? Like, either way, we know who is able. Well, verse 19, it says, Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage, and he commanded the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Have you ever made anybody so mad that their face just goes, they just distorts? That it's a client or a boss or a CEO or someone in your life who claims to have authority over you or control over you, and you respond in such a way that you go, no, that's not true. I'm not going to play. And they get so mad because everybody else buckles. Everybody else bends. Everybody else falls in line. Why won't you? So he cranks this puppy up. This is where I'm going to tell a little bit of the story. Turns the gas on. I mean, I don't know how they do that. They got it 7 times hotter than normal. They throw them in. The 2 guys who throw them in die. That's how hot it is. And there's Nebuchadnezzar just waiting for them to burn up. And waiting for them to burn up. And waiting for them to burn up. And what happens? They don't burn up. He goes and looks why they're not burning up, and he counts 4 men in the furnace, which, he's not a wizard in math, but he can count 4. And he asks the question, didn't we throw 3 in there? There's 4 walking around. So he tells them to take it down, and he goes to the door, and he says this. He says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So they stepped out of the fire when the king's officers, again, all the officials were there. When they were all there and saw that the fire had not even touched them, not a hair on their head was singed, their clothing was not scorched, they didn't even smell of smoke, which I just think is such a God thing to do, little tiny detail. Watch this. Didn't even smell that way, did it? So cool. Didn't even smell of smoke. And then it goes here. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is, you'll read it, if you read Daniel on your own, which I encourage you to do, he's kind of a guy of extremes. So one is like this extreme thing, and now another extreme. That Nebuchadnezzar says, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any other God but their own God. Extreme comes. Therefore, I make the decree that if anyone, no matter their race or nation or language, speak a word against God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be burned or turned to heaps of rubble. Just bring it back. Nebuchadnezzar, okay? There is no other God who can rescue like this. Now watch this, watch this. And then they get promoted. The king then, what's the word? Promoted them. Promoted the guys to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. Here, if you don't get anything else out of the story, just remember this part. That your boss, your clients, your vendors, your manager and your foreman, your part-time manager at Wendy's, okay? They do not control the outcome of your life. Some of them just think they do. But they don't. But they don't. And when we think about how we do what we do matters, we think about the fact that we want God to bless us at work and bless us through work and show up tangibly in our work. There's this prophet named Jeremiah, who way before Israel was sacked and way before Israel was conquered, he was telling them what was going to happen. He was telling them, he was prophesying. He was telling the people, this is what's going to happen. And he says this in Jeremiah 29, he actually says something very specific to the people who are going to be exiled to Babylon. Let's read. Jeremiah 29 says this. This is Jeremiah years and years before. This is what God says to all those that I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Watch this. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens, eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. What? Jeremiah is saying, look, you're going to be thrown into the pagan world. You're going to be thrown into a pagan nation. Here's what I want you to do. Set up camp. Dig roots. Plant stuff. Enjoy stuff. Marry them off. Take some wives. Get involved. Increase. Don't decrease. Let me just ask you a question. What are Christians tempted to do when they go work in giant companies that are run by Satan? Okay? What, just companies that are horrible. What do Christians tend to do? Shrink back. Find another Christian. Come up with secret signals. Meet each other for lunch. So you can talk about Jesus stuff. And here is Jeremiah saying, guys, God has a word for you where you're going. And watch this. He says, increase, don't decrease. Seek the peace. And what's the word? Prosperity of the city of which I've carried you into. Pray for the Lord. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, then you too will, what's the word? Prosper. That's money, folks. Hey, that's success. That's work related. And he says, if it prospers, you prosper. Be a part of the solution, not the problem. Be a part of what's good about that company, not what's bad. Go be a part of this in that city. Go be a part of that in that nation. I'm going to bless you. If you bless, you're the working of blessing in them. And then, of course, it goes on to say in Jeremiah 29:11, which all of us have on the bottom of our emails and a bumper sticker at work and, crocheted pillows in the house. 29 verse 11, just a few verses later, what does it say? For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans to what? Prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. And a bunch of Christians get in a little bubble and go, he knows the plans he has for me. Plans to bless me and give me a future. Did you have any idea that that was written in the context of the exiled to Babylon? It is written in the context of saying, wake up. You're going to work. You're going to be involved in. You're going to be a part of Babylon. Pray for it. Work in it. Dig roots in there. And be a part of what helps them prosper, because when you help them prosper, you as my people will prosper. I have a plan for you to prosper if you'll simply obey me. Isn't that amazing? What's very important as we close this out is that for us, and you have to think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I want you to think back to, if you read through this, they got a promotion, they got a raise. And they never once became that guy. They never once, even afterwards, they didn't walk around and people would be like, man, it's hot out today. And they're like, yeah, you know what else is hot? The furnace. Unless Jesus is there. You know what I'm saying? Like it never became that guy. They never grubbed in somebody's face. They never became that guy. They just lived their life of character. And when the push came to shove and their work and their faith values intersected, they chose God. Because they knew that if I want God to bless my work, let me ask this question. This is a question I want you to think about as we leave today. If you believe that God has you at work or in a position or a place of authority or a place of job, period, and you believe that God gave that to you, you believe it wasn't because how smart you are or how you knew the right people or you were there at the right time. You believe that God has sort of blessed you where you are. Then why would he want you to compromise what he's doing in you just to keep the job that he gave you? See, when you begin to think through it that way and you begin to process it that way, you begin to think through and say, I'm called to lead a life that isn't that guy, but to lead a life of character and integrity and ethics in my work so that people would ask the question, why are they so different? I mean, when everybody else bends and twists and compromises, they never seem to, and it never seems to bother them. They never seem to be shaken. They never seem to have a fear of losing their job. They work harder than anyone else, but they don't compromise who they are. And then one day, if they ever asked that in front of you, you would have the opportunity to share with them why. Who are you working for? Just answer that question this week. When you go to job, I mean, everybody has that Monday morning dread thing, you know? Like they don't even want to go to bed tonight because if you go to bed, it's just acknowledging that I have to get up and go to work. Colossians 3:23, who are you working for this week? What would change about your job if you were working for Jesus? You know, don't put that on a t-shirt, okay? I don't work for you, Jim. I work for Jesus Christ, okay? Don't be that guy. Just begin to live out your life and be men and women of character. Because how you do what you do matters. It matters to God, and believe it or not, it matters to the place that He's put you. Who do you work for? And would He ever really ask you to compromise at a job He gave you? At a position of authority that He's blessed you with? Would He ever ask you to do that? Would He ever be pleased with the times we have? Just confess it. We're going to pray together now. Just confess that out. Ask for a fresh start. Ask for this week to be a new week and a new year, where you begin to understand your character and your faith values, that God cares about what happens when it intersects. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for today. We thank you for your word. We thank you for how it challenges us and how it inspires us. And God, we thank you that whether we've acknowledged it or not, you care deeply about what we do. And not just about what we do, but how we do it. That God, ultimately, we cannot just compartmentalize our life and think that you only care about the soul when everything else is just riding down the culture train, sort of doing what we have to do to eke by. God, when you've had so much more in store for us, if we would just yield, surrender, and confess our shortcomings and faults to you, and pray that you would, by your power, give us a new week. Give us a new year. Give us new opportunities to see you come through in unmistakable and tangible ways. You would cause all of us here to be men and women of character and integrity and honest and great worth ethics, so that people all around would see there's something different. Something different about them, even here at work. And I know they talk about church every once in a while, but it's not just church, apparently, because it affects everything here, too. God, your light would shine before men. And we would live the lives of work and worship that you've called us to. We pray all of this, God, in your Heavenly Father's name, Jesus. Amen.
We hope you've enjoyed engaging in our worship experience. Everything we do at Journey is to help make a difference in people's lives. If God has been moving and working in your life, we would love to hear your story. You can share it with us at mystory@thejourneyonline.com. If you would like to invest in the ministry and mission at Journey Church, you can give online at thejourneyonline.com. Thank you for investing in the lives that are changing at Journey Church.